What happens when one of cinema's greatest living legends, a man who spent 6 decades shaping American film, who's won every award worth winning, who's worked with every director worth remembering, walks onto a late-night talk show expecting the usual lighthearted promotion, only to realize the host has prepared an ambush disguised as comedy? What happens when someone whose entire career has been built on artistic integrity and a refusal to compromise collides with a comedian who believes political activism grants him permission to attack guests under the cover of entertainment? When a conversation that should be about movies turns into a referendum on politics, respect, and whether Hollywood's elite can ever simply discuss their work without being forced to pass ideological loyalty tests on national television. What you're about to witness isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. Not just another awkward late-night moment. Not just another case of a host pushing too far and a guest pushing back. This is the moment Robert De Niro, the raging bull himself, the Godfather Part 2 legend, the 2-time Oscar winner who spent his entire career letting his work speak louder than his words, finally had enough of being treated like a political prop instead of an artist. This is Jimmy Kimmel discovering that not every Hollywood icon will sit quietly while their appearance is hijacked for political comedy that stopped being funny and started being preachy years ago. The interview had been booked months in advance. It was part of the promotional tour for De Niro's latest film, a passion project he'd spent years developing, working with a director he deeply admired, telling a story that mattered to him far beyond another paycheck. His publicist had been clear with the show's producers: focus on the film, keep it light, show respect for a legacy that predates most of the production staff. Standard protocol when hosting a legend whose career began before late-night television looked anything like it does today. But Jimmy Kimmel had other plans. Earlier that afternoon, in the writer's room, surrounded by a team that had spent years turning every interview into political commentary, Jimmy made a decision. De Niro had been outspoken before, so why not lean into it? Why waste the opportunity on boring movie promotion when you could manufacture a viral moment, grab headlines, make news, turn a routine interview into something that trends instead of fades? What Jimmy failed to calculate was this: Robert De Niro didn't survive 6 decades in Hollywood, didn't build one of the most respected careers in film history by letting anyone tell him how to perform, what to say, or how to behave. Not producers, not directors, and certainly not late-night comedians. And when someone who commands that level of respect feels disrespected, when someone who's earned control over their own narrative has that control stripped away, when dignity is sacrificed for someone else's idea of good television, there are consequences. This isn't about whether you agree with De Niro's politics or Kimmel's. It's not about whether celebrities should engage in activism or stick strictly to entertainment. It's not about whether political comedy is brave or exhausting. This is about what happens when a host forgets that the relationship between interviewer and guest is built on mutual respect. When entertainment crosses into exploitation. When someone finally decides they'd rather walk away than participate in their own diminishment. Jimmy Kimmel thought he was creating a moment that would dominate social media. A clip that would land headlines. Proof that his show was still relevant in an oversaturated late-night landscape. What he created instead was a masterclass in how to alienate a legend, lose audience respect, and demonstrate that sometimes the person who walks away is the one who actually wins. Because when Robert De Niro walks off your show, when one of the greatest actors in American history decides your stage isn't worth standing on, that says something no amount of spin can fix. Buckle up. What you're about to witness isn't just explosive television. It's a cultural moment, one that exposed the rot at the heart of late-night comedy, the exhaustion with constant politicization, and what happens when someone who's earned the right to dignity finally stops tolerating anything less. The Jimmy Kimmel Live! Studio carried its familiar energy that night. The audience filed in with excited anticipation. The band warmed up with their usual riffs. The lighting crew made final adjustments, locking in every camera angle. This was a major booking. Robert De Niro didn't do late-night appearances often, and when he did, it mattered. The audience knew they were about to see a legend. A man whose filmography reads like a greatest hits list of American cinema. Backstage, De Niro sat in his dressing room with the quiet intensity everyone who'd ever worked with him recognized. At 80 years old, he still carried the presence that made him one of the most compelling figures ever to appear on screen. His publicist went over the schedule one last time. Talk about the film, mention the director, share a light story from set, keep it professional, keep it respectful, standard late-night protocol. What De Niro and his team didn't know was that, in Jimmy Kimmel's dressing room, an entirely different conversation was taking place. The host and his head writer weren't reviewing questions about the film. They were flipping through notes on De Niro's past political comments, his criticisms, his blunt opinions, his willingness to speak out. "We can't waste this," Jimmy said, tapping his notes. He's been outspoken before. "Let's talk about something that actually matters instead of another forgettable movie interview." The head writer hesitated. Bob's people were pretty clear about keeping it focused on the film. Bob's people don't produce this show. Jimmy snapped, his tone signaling the discussion was over. "We'll talk about the movie, but we're also going to have a real conversation." That's what makes good television. What followed would prove just how wrong he was. What Jimmy called a real conversation, De Niro would soon recognize as something else entirely, an ambush designed to turn a straightforward promotional appearance into political theater. The show opened as expected. Jimmy delivered his usual blend of political jokes and celebrity gossip, drawing easy laughs from an audience that knew exactly what kind of program they were watching. Then came the introduction. Jimmy's voice shifted into that reverent tone hosts reserve for true legends. Our next guest needs no introduction, but I'm giving him one anyway because his raison is that extraordinary. 2-time Academy Award winner. 7-time Oscar nominee, The Godfather Part, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas. Honestly, I could do this all night. Please welcome the legendary Robert De Niro. The audience erupted as De Niro walked on stage, wearing that familiar, restrained smile. He waved briefly, acknowledging the applause without indulging it, shook Jimmy's hand, and settled into the guest chair with the ease of someone who'd done this for decades. He expected a pleasant conversation about his work. Bob, thank you so much for being here. Jimmy began, his tone warm and inviting. Before we get into the new film, I've got to say you look great. What's the secret? De Niro smiled faintly. Good lighting and talented cinematographers. The audience laughed, appreciating the self-deprecating humor from a man who could have taken the compliment at face value. Jimmy laughed too, relaxing into what looked like exactly the kind of easy, respectful exchange everyone had anticipated. So the new film, Jimmy continued. You've been working on this project for, 3 years now? Tell us about it. De Niro leaned forward slightly, his posture shifting as genuine enthusiasm surfaced. It's a story I've wanted to tell for a long time. It's about... Before we get into that, Jimmy interrupted. The change was subtle, just a slight shift in tone, but De Niro noticed. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. I have to ask you about something you said a few months ago at that awards ceremony. You made some pretty strong comments about, I'm here to talk about the film. De Niro said. His voice was calm, but the edge was unmistakable. A warning, quiet and controlled. Jimmy smiled, but it was the practiced television smile now, not genuine, not relaxed. I know, and we'll get to that. But you've been very vocal about politics, and I think the audience would really love to hear. The audience, De Niro cut in, is here because you told them I'd be talking about my new movie. That's why I'm here, to talk about the film. The atmosphere in the studio shifted instantly. The light, promotional energy drained from the room as the audience sensed the conversation crossing into something else. Jimmy's smile stayed fixed, but his eyes betrayed calculation. He'd committed to this direction, backing down now meant losing face. Come on, Bob, Jimmy said, forcing a tone of friendly banter. You can't come on a talk show and expect us not to talk about things you've said publicly. That's not how this works. Actually, De Niro replied quietly, his voice dropping just enough to command attention. That's exactly how this works. Anyone familiar with De Niro's performances knew this moment. The quieter he became, the more serious the situation was. I agreed to come on your show to promote a film, he continued. My team made that clear to your producers. If you wanted a political discussion, you should have been honest about it, instead of ambushing me on live television. The word ambushing landed hard, hanging in the air between them. Jimmy's smile finally cracked, replaced by something defensive, almost confrontational. Ambush. That's a strong word. I'm just asking questions people want answered. No, De Niro said flatly. You're trying to turn a promotional interview into political theater because you think it'll get you headlines. And with that, the line had been crossed. That's not journalism, Jimmy, De Niro said evenly. That's exploitation. The studio fell completely silent. The expectation of light entertainment had dissolved into something far more uncomfortable, the unmistakable feeling that the audience was witnessing a real confrontation. This wasn't scripted tension or playful sparring. This was raw, unsmoothed, and escalating by the second. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, attempting to reassert authority. Look, Bob, I respect you tremendously. If you respected me, De Niro cut in, you'd be talking about my work instead of trying to turn me into a prop for your political audience. If you respected me, you wouldn't have messled my team about what this interview was going to be. We didn't mislead anyone. Jimmy shot back. You said we'd discuss the film. De Niro replied calmly. That was the agreement. And 5 minutes into this appearance, you've spent more time on politics than on the project I came here to promote. His voice never rose, but there was steel beneath it. That's not respect, Jimmy. That's a bait and switch. Jimmy's posture stiffened, defensiveness hardening into aggression. He had gone too far to retreat now. You know what, Bob, he said. You've made millions in an industry fueled by political opinions. You've been more than happy to share yours when it suited you. Don't suddenly act like you're above it. De Niro's jaw tightened. There's a difference between choosing when and where to speak about issues I care about and being ambushed on a talk show that promised one thing and delivered another, he said. You understand that difference, don't you? Or has the chase for viral moments completely replaced basic professional courtesy? The tension shifted from uncomfortable to openly hostile. Jimmy's face flushed, part embarrassment at being called out so directly, part anger at being challenged on his own stage. Professional courtesy, Jimmy snapped. You've said some pretty harsh things politically. Where was your courtesy then? When I speak about politics, De Niro replied, his voice dropping dangerously low, I do it in places where political discussion is expected, rallies, fundraisers, political interviews. Settings where everyone knows why we're there. He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto Jimmy with the same intensity that had defined some of cinema's most unforgettable performances. I don't hijack someone else's platform under false pretenses. A beat. What you're doing right now isn't brave political comedy. It isn't speaking truth to power. It's a host who apparently can't have a normal conversation with a guest without turning it into a political performance for an increasingly disengaged audience. That landed. Late-night ratings had been slipping for years, and hearing it said out loud by Robert De Niro on live television was not part of Jimmy's plan. My audience is doing just fine, Jimmy said defensively. They appreciate real conversations, not promotional fluff. Real conversations? De Niro repeated, almost pitying now. Is that what you think this is? From where I'm sitting, it looks like someone so desperate to stay relevant, so desperate to prove his show still matters, that he's willing to disrespect a guest who came here in good faith. The audience barely breathed. This wasn't a moment that could be laughed off or edited into a punchline. This was personal, and it was unraveling fast. The band leader shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to jump in or stay silent. The cameras kept rolling because there was nothing else they could do. Live television doesn't blink. You know what, Bob, Jimmy said, his voice carrying the stubborn tone of someone defending a bad position. Maybe if you didn't want to talk politics, you shouldn't have been so vocal in the first place. You can't have it both ways. I absolutely can, De Niro replied without hesitation. I can speak about issues I care about in appropriate contexts and still expect that when I agree to a promotional interview, the host will honor that agreement. That's not hypocrisy, Jimmy. That's honesty. Then he stood. The movement was sudden and decisive. Gas rippled through the audience. The control room scrambled. De Niro calmly removed his microphone, handling it with the same care and precision that had defined his craft for decades. What are you doing? Jimmy asked, panic breaking through. I'm leaving, De Niro said simply, placing the mic on the chair. I came here to talk about a film I'm proud of, about the work, about the people who made it. Instead, he continued, I was ambushed by a host more interested in using me as political decoration than treating me like an artist. Bob, come on, Jimmy said, standing now, trying to block his path, or at least appear in control. Don't be so sensitive. We're just talking. No, De Niro said, stopping him cold. You're trying to have your conversation regardless of what I agreed to or why I came here. That's not a conversation. That's a monologue you expected me to participate in. He moved toward the edge of the stage. Jimmy's attempts to regain control grew increasingly desperate. You walk out now. Jimmy called after him. You're just proving you can't handle being challenged. De Niro stopped. He turned back. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 6 decades in an industry that had tried and failed. I've handled being challenged my entire career, Jimmy, De Niro said, his voice steady. Real challenges. Directors who pushed me. Roles that demanded everything I had. Critics who questioned my choices. He paused. What I won't handle is being disrespected by someone who mistakes controversy for content. He gestured toward the stage, the lights, the cameras, the machinery of late-night television. You've got your platform, your audience, your cameras. Use them however you want, but you'll use them without me. I don't participate in bad faith. I never have, and I'm not starting now at 80 years old to help your ratings. Applause broke out, not unanimous, but unmistakable. They weren't applauding a political position. They were applauding refusal, applauding dignity, applauding someone finally saying out loud what many of them had quietly felt about the relentless politicization of entertainment. Jimmy's face flickered through emotions in rapid succession: anger, embarrassment, desperation, and finally something that looked like realization. If you leave, Jimmy said sharply, you're not welcome back. That's when De Niro smiled, an actual smile, the first genuine one since the tension had ignited. Jimmy, he said calmly, that's the first honest thing you've said all night. And honestly, I'm perfectly fine with that. I have plenty of places to talk about my work, places where the hosts actually want to talk about the work. And with that, he walked off the stage. Jimmy stood alone under the lights, trying, and failing, to salvage something beyond repair. The band leader looked toward him, waiting for a cue music, commercial, anything to relieve the suffocating awkwardness. Well, Jimmy finally said, forcing levity that never arrived, I guess Bob had somewhere else to be. No laughter. Because everyone in the room understood this wasn't a scheduling issue or a diva moment. It was a legendary actor refusing to trade his dignity for someone else's idea of good television. Jimmy pressed on. He introduced the next guest. He cracked jokes about what had happened. He tried to frame the walkout as someone unable to handle tough questions. But the energy was gone. The audience had seen it, a host breaking the unspoken compact between interviewer and guest, a legend disrespected for clicks. A moment where late-night comedy's obsession with politics finally pushed someone past the breaking point. Backstage, De Niro was already in his car before the next segment ended. His publicist began damage control, but he stopped her. There's no damage, he said quietly. I came to discuss a film. The host wanted politics instead of honoring the agreement. I left. That's the story, and I'm comfortable with it. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading online. for Robert De Niro began trending worldwide. Reactions split predictably. Some praised Jimmy for asking real questions. Others condemned him for ambushing a guest. But a significant majority, including many who disagreed politically, respected De Niro's decision to walk rather than participate in something he hadn't signed up for. Film critics and entertainment journalists weighed in, many noting that the walkout symbolized something larger: growing exhaustion with late-night television's inability to let entertainment simply be entertainment, with forcing artists through political litmus tests, with ignoring boundaries guests clearly set. Jimmy's show, already struggling in the ratings, took an immediate hit. Publicists for other major stars quietly reconsidered bookings, weighing whether the promotional upside was worth the risk of similar ambushes. The incident became a case study in how not to treat guests, how not to conduct interviews, how not to confuse a platform's purpose with a host's personal agenda. In the days that followed, Jimmy offered a half-hearted explanation instead of an apology, suggesting De Niro had been overly sensitive and that politics were fair game. The response landed poorly, defensive tone, deaf, and disconnected from why audiences reacted so strongly. De Niro, meanwhile, appeared on other shows, programs whose hosts actually wanted to discuss the film. On those stages, he was thoughtful, engaging, and generous about his craft. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. The film itself benefited in an unexpected way. The walkout generated more attention than any routine interview ever could, but more importantly, it reminded people why Robert De Niro had earned their respect in the first place, not just for his performances, but for his integrity, his refusal to compromise, his insistence on choosing when and how his voice would be used. The moment sparked broader conversations about the state of late-night television, about whether relentless politicization had driven audiences away, about whether hosts had forgotten that their primary job wasn't to lecture, but to elevate their guests. Some defended Jimmy, but most recognized the distinction that mattered. There's a difference between asking hard questions and breaking trust. And when that line is crossed, sometimes the most powerful statement isn't what's said on camera, it's walking away. There's a clear difference between asking political questions when they're appropriate and hijacking a promotional interview for political purposes after explicitly agreeing not to. That distinction sat at the heart of the walkout, and it exposed something far bigger than one uncomfortable television moment: the shifting power dynamics of entertainment media itself. For decades, the assumption was simple: celebrities needed late-night shows more than late-night shows needed celebrities. De Niro's walkout, and the overwhelmingly supportive public response that followed, proved that assumption no longer holds. In an era of social media, podcasts, streaming platforms, and limitless alternatives, a disastrous late-night appearance can damage a show far more than it harms a guest. What made this moment especially significant was who was involved. This wasn't a young actor taking a risky stand early in their career, gambling with future roles or industry favor. This was Robert De Niro, an icon whose place in film history is untouchable, whose contributions to cinema are undeniable, whose legacy cannot be diminished by anything said on a talk show couch. That security is precisely what gave the walkout its power. De Niro didn't need the show. He didn't need the exposure. He didn't need to endure a bad faith interview to sell tickets. He had nothing to lose by insisting on basic respect and honoring a clear agreement. And when someone with nothing to lose finally says enough, when someone whose reputation can't be threatened refuses to tolerate disrespect, that's when real change becomes possible. The walkout also forced an uncomfortable reckoning with late-night television itself. Somewhere along the way, many of these shows stopped being about entertainment and became primarily about politics. They stopped courting broad audiences and instead narrowed their focus to partisan demographics. They stopped treating guests as artists with meaningful work to discuss and started using them as props, tools for controversy, vehicles for outrage. De Niro's exit was a rejection of all of that. It was a reminder that entertainment can still be entertainment, that promotional interviews can remain promotional, that not every conversation needs to be weaponized for political gain. And it reinforced a simple truth: the best moments in show business come from respecting the craft, not exploiting it. In the weeks that followed, other actors privately thanked De Niro, not because they all agreed with him politically, but because he'd done what many of them felt unable to do. He set boundaries. He insisted on respect. He reminded them that participation isn't owed when the terms change. Jimmy Kimmel's show, of course, continued, but something had shifted. An invisible line had been crossed. The incident became shorthand for everything audiences felt had gone wrong with late-night television: politics overtaking entertainment, trust sacrificed for virality, controversy prioritized over conversation. And De Niro's film, it did just fine. Audiences who respected his stand made a point of supporting the work he'd actually come to promote. Critics gave the film more attention than it might have otherwise received. It succeeded on its own merits, but the walkout reminded people why they respected the man behind it. The lasting lesson of that night wasn't about politics or personalities. It was about respect for guests, for agreements, for the basic compact that makes entertainment media work. When hosts honor that compact, everyone wins. When they betray it for clicks and controversy, everyone loses, especially the host. De Niro didn't shout, he didn't grandstand, he didn't argue endlessly. He simply refused to participate in something he hadn't agreed to. He walked away with his dignity intact and let the consequences speak for themselves. And they spoke loudly. They said legends don't need to compromise. They said integrity matters more than exposure. They said sometimes the strongest move isn't fighting back, but refusing to play a rigged game. Jimmy Kimmel wanted a viral moment. He got one, just not the kind he planned. Instead of clips of provocative political sound bites, the internet was flooded with footage of a legend walking away, an audience applauding that decision, and a host left standing alone, trying to explain how he'd driven off one of the greatest actors in American history. In Hollywood, where reputation is currency and respect is earned over decades, De Niro's currency remained rock solid. Kimmel's. That was another story. The walkout became his legacy moment, but not in the way he intended. It was the moment everyone learned that even late-night hosts can push too far, demand too much, and discover that some people simply won't trade their dignity for entertainment. Robert De Niro walked off that stage and never looked back. He didn't need to. His work spoke for itself. It always had, and it always would. That's the privilege of being a legend. You don't owe anyone anything except the quality of your art. And on that front, Bob had nothing left to prove.